Okay, let's talk about segment analysis, responsibility accounting, and decentralization. So, what is this chapter all about? Okay, tatlong items lang pag-uusapan natin dito. You have segment analysis. Now, when we say segment analysis, this is when we try to evaluate the performance of a segment. Na-discuss na natin to last time in our topics, no, or in our other subjects. When we use the term segment, it's actually a part of an organization. No, naririnig na siguro ninyo kung ano yung segmentation, which refers to the process of dividing the organization into smaller, more manageable parts. Now, that process is most of the time, yan, to call the process of decentralization. Parang ganito yan eh. If you try to divide the organization to smaller, more manageable parts, that's segmentation, no? But for each segment, if you try to put, no, managers, ayan, decision makers, ayan, for each of the segment, then that's now called decentralization. So segmentation, it's just a part of decentralization. Dalawa po ang elements ng decentralization. Okay? When we say decentralization, number one, when you divide the organization to smaller, more manageable segments. Okay? And then number two, okay, when these segments will have their own decision makers. Okay? So, ayan. So, that's the concept of decentralization. Okay? And decentralization, it's not, walang absolute decentralization. And it's not black or white. Okay? Na kapag hindi ka decentralized, centralized ka. Ganun. Now, ano ba yung centralized? Okay, this is when the decision-making process is focused, no, to one individual or to few entities lang. Ngayon, when we say it's not, walang absolute, okay, it's not black or white, okay, it's more of a continuum. Pag sinabi natin continuum, walang katapusan yan. Okay, so a company may be decentralized, okay, may be viewed as decentralized and centralized at the same time, depending on whose point of view. Okay, what may be decentralized for you may not be decentralized for me. Okay, so ganun yun, di ba? Hindi siya black or white. There are more than 50 shades of grays in between. Okay, yun po yung ibig sabihin ng continuum. Okay, so ayun. Now, so in the process, no, of decentralization or segmentation, you're going to come up with different responsibility centers. Okay, so ayan. Pag sinabi nating responsibility centers, in some books, 5 yan, but we'll just talk about the 3 basic responsibility centers for today. Okay, so ano ba yung mga basic? You have your cost center. Okay, so pag sinabi nating cost center, the manager is only responsible for costs that are incurred. Okay, ngayon, kung meron pang revenue na kasama, you now have your profit center. Ayan, the decision maker or the manager is responsible for costs and profits. Anong nangyari dito? Burahin natin yan. Ayan. Profit center. Cost center. And then, you also have your investment center. Sulat natin. Okay. Pag sinabi nating investment center, okay, the decision maker is responsible not just for the costs incurred, not just for the profits incurred, okay, but also, okay, meron na siyang responsibility to acquire assets. Okay, so, yun. Ulitin natin ha. For cost center, the manager has control over costs only. And costs lang. For investment center, or no, for profit center, you have costs and revenues. Okay, now for investment center, the manager is responsible or has control over costs. May costs revenues, and ano pa, investments or acquisition of assets. Ayan. Na nabanggit ko kanina, bakit in some books 5? Kasi aside from cost, profit, and investment center, meron din silang revenue center. Okay, so isulat natin. Revenue center, okay, wherein the manager is responsible for the revenues incurred by the organization. Pero, take note, each center, ang concept kasi nito ay, each center will always incur costs. Kaya kung may cost ka rin lang na ma-incur, parang napaka-imposible na ang control lang ng manager ay revenue and then wala siyang control over some cost. So, ito medyo questionable yan. In some books, you also have your asset center. Okay? What is this asset center? This is when the decision maker has responsibility over asset acquisition or investments. So, again, okay, parang napaka-imposible naman na purely asset acquisition lang yan. Okay, bakit? Kasi sigurado, okay, the manager will incur cost and will have significant influence to revenues if they make decisions on asset acquisition. Okay, so, ayun. These are the 3 basic. Kapag tinanong ka ng 5, idagdag mo yung revenue or asset. Pero, bakit natin aalisin yung revenue? Because that's already part of your profit center. What about asset center? Okay, that's already part of your investment center. Okay, so now, why do we need to understand the responsibilities of the managers? Because we are going to evaluate them based on their responsibility or based on what they can control. For example, okay, you cannot evaluate a manager, okay, of a cost center based on revenues kasi wala naman siyang control over revenues. Okay, or you evaluate the performance of a manager based on the performance of assets acquired. Kunyari, manager lang siya ng isang profit center, so hindi po pwede yun. So mamaya pag-uusapan natin yung mga iba't ibang tools on how we can evaluate the different responsibility centers. Okay, now as of this point, okay, take note that not because, ganito, para may hierarchy kasi, not because your investment center has, has more responsibilities, no, as compared to profits and costs, it doesn't mean that they belong to the top level in your organizational charts, no? Alam nyo na yun, charts. Every Sunday you go to charts, okay? So for example, if this is your, paulit-ulit na daw yung joke ni Sir. And if this is your organizational chart, for example, doesn't mean na, eto sigurado investment center. And then this one, siguro these are profit centers. And then these two, siguro these are cost centers. Hindi po ganun. It's possible that on the same level, okay, you will have cost centers and profit centers. Okay, pwede kayo nasa ilalim, may profit center ka dito, and then sa taas may cost center. Okay po, so hindi po siya ganon. Okay, so those are just some of the things that you have to remember. Let's talk about segment. Ayan, a segment is actually a part of an organization. Okay, it could be a physical part or it could pertain to an activity. Okay, na meron kang cost, revenue, or profit data. So, for an entity, okay, it could be segmented and based on, let's say, operations, and functions. Okay, so like for example, this segment, sales yan. Ito, production. Ito, research and development. Ito, nasa accounting and treasury. Okay, they could also be segmented according to geographic, ayan, geographic location. Itong segment na to, Dagupan, north of Luzon, ayan, Visayas, Mindanao. Okay, or it could be segmented according to products, ayan, and so on and so forth, or pwedeng combination. Like, for example, you segment them first according to their products, and then for each product segment, mahahati na naman siya according to geographic location. Ayan. So, pwede po yun. Now, when it comes to segment analysis, no, whether it's divided as to operations, geographic location, products, or services, when we analyze these segments, okay, some things you have to remember, it's easier to evaluate them if we are using the behavioral approach, okay, in preparing their financial statements, especially the income statement. When we say behavioral approach, we use the contribution margin method. Okay, so ano ba ito? We separate your variable cost and fixed costs. And then number 2, okay, in the use of contribution margin approach or behavioral approach, your fixed cost, okay, will be divided into 2. Okay, so you will now have your traceable, ayan, traceable fixed cost, then you have your allocated fixed cost. Okay, so nako, nabanggit na to. Let's review your cost accounting. When we say traceable fixed costs, these are costs that are traceable, directly attributable to the existence of a segment. For example, let's say in an educational institution, sa UC na lang, no? Kunyari, let's talk about the College of Agriculture. Sa College of Agriculture, meron po tayong dean. Okay, so the fixed salary of the dean will be considered as a traceable fixed cost. Okay, it's traceable to the College of Agriculture. If we are going to, let's say, eliminate the College of Agriculture, we can eliminate the fixed salary of the dean. Okay po. Now, what about allocated costs? Okay, allocated costs or allocated fixed costs, okay, they arise, okay, because of the operation of a company, because of the existence of the company, not because of the segment. Okay, therefore, eliminating the segment, okay, will not eliminate or reduce your allocated fixed cost. Like for example, if we allocate the cost of, let's say, the salary for the vice president of an academic affairs, no, i-allocate natin yan in different colleges. Okay, if you eliminate this college, it will not reduce the overall salary, fixed salary of the vice president of academic affairs. Okay, now take note, a traceable fixed cost, okay, or an allocated fixed cost may be traceable at the same time. It depends on what level, no? Okay, balikan natin. Kunyari, your College of Agriculture Dean, ayan, okay, is traceable, okay, the salary of this dean is traceable to this college. Ayan. But if we're going to allocate the salary of the dean to the different programs, like for example, Bachelor of Science in Agriculture, okay, or Forensic Agriculture, meron bang ganun? Management, Agriculture, Astronomy na lang daw pala para mas social. Bachelor of Science in Astronomy, Financial Astronomy, and Managerial Astronomy. Let's just assume that these are the different programs. Okay? So, sa level ng college, this is traceable, no? But on this level, okay, this is considered as an allocated cost. The salary of the dean is an allocated cost. Why? If you try to eliminate one program, for example, yan, Financial Astronomy, kunyari meron ganun, are we going to reduce, ayan, or eliminate the salary of the dean? Hindi po. Okay, so let's go back. We use the contribution margin method. In the process, if we're going to reflect our fixed cost, dalawa po yan. You have your traceable and allocated fixed cost. Traceable can be eliminated by eliminating the segment. Allocated fixed cost cannot be eliminated by eliminating the segment. And, okay, a fixed cost may be traceable and allocated at the same time, okay, depending on what level. Okay po? So, ayun. Now, in evaluating the performance of these segments, there are a lot of tools, no? Pero the common tools used in MS, no? Ayan. Tools that will be used in this subject to evaluate their performance is normally tatlo lang yung ginagamit natin dito. You have your segment margin, you have your return on investment. Alam na natin to from financial statement analysis. And then you have your residual income. Yan. Residual income. Very similar to your EVA. Okay? The only difference is that EVA is after tax. Ito hindi siya after tax. Because it's just focused on segment operation. Okay po? So, let's start. Now, let's start with your segment margin. Paano po ba itong segment margin na to? Ako, malakas na yung ulan sa labas. Taran! Okay, this is one of the best tools used in evaluating the performance of a segment. As long as your segment margin is positive, there is a chance, no, na magi-improve yan yung segment mo. Pero pag nag-negative yan, huwag ka nang umasa. Diba? Narinig nyo na ba yung explanation na yon? Very similar to contribution margin. Okay. Now, let's compute for your segment margin. Some things that you have to remember, we use your contribution margin approach. And then, we separate your fixed cost. Okay. Here, we are only going to use your traceable fixed cost. Now, to borrow the material of Garrison, yung dinistribute ko dun sa canvas natin, okay? Paano yun? You have here your sales. Ayan, you have here your sales. Less your variable costs. Pwede natin ito sa dalawa. Variable cost of goods sold and then other variable cost equals your contribution margin. And then less your traceable. Let's just use T. Traceable fixed cost. Ayan. Traceable fixed cost equals your segment margin. Okay po. So, let's have an example. Let's assume that this is your segment C and segment D. Okay, so kinokopya ko lang to from the earlier material, no, na binigay ko sa inyo. So, here you have 500,000 less 230. Okay, the contribution margin is 270. Oh, okay, no? Okay, maganda kasi positive yung contribution margin niya. And then here you have 300,000 and 150. Again, the contribution margin is positive. Okay, so you have 150. Bakit hindi siya consistent? Baka pwede nating ayusin to saglit. Tcharan! Nakakahiya naman sa inyo. Ayun. Now, what's the traceable fixed cost for this segment? Okay, kunyari, given yan at 170, you will now have a segment margin of 100. Here, let's assume that this one is 90. So, 150 minus 90, you will now have 60,000. Okay po. Ayan. Actually, dapat pala ito yung total. But anyway, let's have here your total. Na-modify na. Ayan, na-modify na siya. Okay, so you have 800,000. Okay, you have here 380. Resulting to 420. Okay, dito you have a total of 100 and 160. Okay, and the total here will be 260 pala. I'm sorry. It should be 260 Okay, so you will have 100 and 160 as the total segment margin. Okay, now what is this segment margin? This is how much a segment is contributing to the overall profits, okay, of the company. This means that this segment is contributing 100,000 while this segment is contributing 60,000. And by eliminating this segment, okay, you will be eliminating 60,000 pesos. Okay po? Ayan. O what about the common cost or allocated cost? Okay, so ilagay natin. Common or allocated, pareho lang yun. So you have your common fixed cost. How do you present that? Lalagay natin siya dito sa total. Okay, so let's assume, no, that your common fixed cost is 60,000. So you deduct that. Your total net income now is how much? 100,000. Okay, so sir, hindi po ba yung 100,000 parang contribution lang yan ng segment number 1 because it has a segment margin of 100 and the total net income is 100. Yes, they are equal, but it doesn't mean that this 100,000 came solely, no, from the first segment. Siyempre, pinaghahatian nila itong cost na to. Okay? So, if you try to remove this segment, okay, how much will be your net income? Oh, dali, 100 minus 100. The answer is 0. Bakit ganun, sir? Okay, the second segment is contributing 60,000. Well, even if it's contributing 60,000, we still have common fixed cost of 100. Same thing will happen if we eliminate the second segment. Okay, mawawala yung 60,000 na yan. So, 100 na yon total segment margin natin. Less 60. Less 60, you will have 40. You will now have 40,000. So that's 100 minus 60. Okay, so that is now your segment margin. Some things that you have to remember. Okay, your common fixed costs will be deducted against our total segment margin. They should not be allocated. Bakit ganon? Okay, because a profitable segment may appear to be unprofitable and it might result to a wrong decision. Okay, so for example, ano kaya magandang example dito? Let's say gamit tayo ng ayan, okay. Let's try to have another, dito na lang. You have here your segment A and then you have here your segment B and then you have here your total. Yung maglagay tayo dito ng sales less variable cost equals your contribution margin less your traceable fixed cost equals your segment margin less your common fixed cost equals your net income. Okay, so sige, basta mag-invento lang tayo dito. Kunyari, this one is 100,000 and this one will be 500,000. Assuming that the variable cost for this is 50,000 and this one will be 300. Ayan, 300,000. So, meron tayong 50,000 na contribution margin and then ito ay 200,000. Let's assume that the traceable fixed cost for the first segment is, let's say, 30,000, while this one is 80. Now let's compute. What's the segment margin? It's 20,000. This one is 120,000. Okay, so let's try to get the total. This one is 600,000. This one is 350,000. Okay, so meron na po tayong difference dito na 250,000 50,000. Ano ba yung math natin? Less 110,000. 250, that will be 140. So you now have 140,000. Let's assume that we have a common fixed cost of ano ba yung maganda dito? Let's say you have 50,000 pesos. So our total net income is 90,000. Okay. Ayan. Okay, so if I ask you how much of this 90,000 is contributed by A, it's 20,000. How much of this 90,000 is contributed by B? It's 120. Mas malaki yung kino-contribute niya. But how come it's only 90,000? Because we have 50,000 na common cost na maibabawas. Okay. Now, what if? Kanyari lang. Sabi natin we're not supposed to allocate this. But what if we allocate this? And then let's say that this is allocated based on, based on the number of customers and or based on the space that is used by their warehouse. Parang ganun. Basta may allocation base ka. And then you found out that this one will be using 60% as the allocation rate and ito ay 40%. Okay, so what is 60% of 50? You have 30,000. And this one, you will have 40%. That's 20,000. So now, you will have a negative income of 10,000. And this one will have 100,000. Okay. Pwedeng sabihin kasi dito na, sayang, our net income is supposed to be 100,000. But because kay segment A incurred a loss of 10,000, okay, that's why we only have a total net income of 90,000. Diba? Tama ba para sabihin yon? Kasalanan ni A. Kaya bumaba yung total net income natin. Okay? Hindi po pwedeng sabihin yon. Take note, what A is actually contributing is not this 10,000, but instead, it's the 20,000. Okay? So, kung accounting yan, net loss. Hindi maganda yung operation. Let's just try to eliminate that. Let's try eliminating this. No? If you eliminate A, you will lose this sales, this variable cost. Okay? So, wala yung 50,000 na yan. You will eliminate the traceable because it's traceable. It's based on the existence of this segment. So, if you eliminate A, mawawala rin yan. Okay, so this will now become 0. But will you be able to eliminate this 30,000? No. What will happen is that the entire 50,000 will be deducted against this 120,000 here. So, if you try to compute, instead of 20,000, we use 50,000. 120 minus 50, that will be how much? 70,000 pesos. Okay, so from 90, it will go down by 70,000 pesos. Why? When you eliminated a segment that is incurring a loss, mali kasi. You do not base your decision, okay, on this figure. Instead, you base it here. Okay, you eliminated a segment that is contributing 20,000. So by eliminating this segment, you're reducing your net income by 20,000. From 90,000 to 70,000 pesos. Okay po? So that is for our segment analysis. Now let's continue with the next tool. What is our next tool? You have ROI or return on investment. For segment analysis, we don't use the total net income of the company. Instead, we just use the income for that segment. Okay, so you have your net operating income. Net operating income. Then, we divide that by your average operating assets. Okay. Now, when we say average operating, Normally, when we use the term operating assets, the first thing that comes in mind is yung current assets natin. Pero actually, hindi. In some books, they don't use this term. Instead, they use the term productive assets. Ayan, productive assets. Assets that are used in operations. So, it doesn't only include your current assets, but it also includes your property, plant, and equipment, no, and other assets that are used in operations. Ayan, or in operations or in production. Okay, so kasama po dyan ang PPE, which means you have to be cautious. Okay, bakit? Your PPE kasi, okay, in your financial statements is presented at cost less your accumulated depreciation. So you now have the book value. Okay? O bakit ganun? Why do we have to be cautious? Because your accumulated depreciation, okay, may be due to the passage of time. Diba? Or due to usage. Dalawa lang naman yung pwedeng paggalingan yan eh. Okay? And as you use your asset, your accumulated depreciation will go up. Okay? Or kahit nga hindi mo ginagamit if it's based on its remaining life, economic life. Tama po, yung straight line, pag nag-straight line ka, every year nagde-depreciate ka. So, every year tumataas yan, which will result to a lower book value. Okay, and this one is part of this ratio. So, if your denominator will go down, okay, your overall ratio will go up. That's why you have to be cautious. Baka ang laki kasi ng depreciation expense natin, and by simply, allowing this change in your accumulated depreciation to increase, your ROI, baka lumabas na maganda yung operations mo, even if it's not. Diba? This is one of the reasons also why some managers would prefer to depreciate their operating assets using shorter economic life. Okay, bakit? Para medyo ma-bloat pa nila yung ROI. Especially if the bonus is based on ROI. Okay, so hindi ko po tinuro sa inyo na gawin nyo yun. Okay, kinikwento ko lang na nangyayari. Okay, so ayun. Anyway, let's continue. Using DuPont analysis, another way to understand your ROI is by dividing this into two ratios, Okay? You have your margin. Ito na naman po tayo. You have your margin and then you have your turnover. Diba? Na-encounter na natin to sa DuPont. Your ROI normally will have net income divided by your operating assets. Your margin naman will have your net income divided by sales. Okay, while your turnover will be equal to your sales divided by your operating assets. So, magkro-cross out yung dalawang yan and you will be left with net income and total assets. So, ayun. So, dito lang po iikot yung mga strategies natin to increase your ROI. How do you increase your ROI? Number one, you increase your sales. Okay. Number two, you reduce your expenses. Okay, so that your net income will increase. Okay. And number three, you reduce the assets that are used in your operations. Okay po. So, ulitin natin how do you increase your ROI? Increase sales, reduce expenses, and reduce your assets that are used in your operation. Okay, maraming application yan, Okay, you can be given the following figures. Kunyari, bibigyan ka ng, you have your sales of 1 million. Okay, and then your expense is 600,000. Okay, if expense is 600,000, this means your net income is 400,000. And if your total asset is, let's say, ano ba yung magandang total asset natin dito? 800,000. Next slide na nga tayo. Okay, o, dito tayo. Okay, so let's have an example. Ito na, bagong example dun sa material na binigay ko sa inyo. If I remember it right, you have your sales. May isang example dun. Sales is equal to 500,000. Okay, and then you have your expenses at 470. Parang 470. Dapat pala may kodigo ako. Yun, 470. Therefore, your net income is now 30,000. Okay, and then you have your assets. The segment of the assets at 200,000. Parang ganyan yan eh. And then, tinanong ka how much is the, or what is the return on investment using the DuPont approach. So, you start with computing your margin. Okay, what's the basic margin? This is your net income divided by your sales, diba? What's your net income? 30,000. Right, divided by your sales na 500,000. And then, aside from margin, you also have your turnover, which is actually your sales na 500,000 divided by your total assets. And in this case, it's 200,000 pesos. So, 30 divided by 500, that will be hindi 60. I think it's just 6. Okay, so this one is 6%. And 500 divided by 200, that's 2.5. 2.5 times. So, if you multiply these two, you will now get your ROI, which is equal to 15%. Oh, ba't mo papahirapan? Your ROI is net income divided by your asset. O, di shortcut mo na lang kung given din lang naman yan. Okay, so you have 30,000 divided by 200,000. Okay po, and you still get 15%. But why are we doing this? Okay, for strategic purposes, no? For example, we found out that your ROI is 15%, okay, which is computed by multiplying your margin, which is 30,000 divided by 500,000, and your turnover, which is 500,000 divided by 200,000. Okay, sabi mo, I'm not happy with 15%. No, I want to have an ROI of 20%. So again, what are our strategies to increase your ROI? Increase your sales, decrease your expenses, and reduce the assets that are used in the operation. Let's assume that your manager stated that, sir, we cannot reduce the assets, no, hanggang 200,000 na lang tayo. Okay, so this is no longer an option. So we are left with increasing your sales and reducing your expenses. Pwedeng sabihin na, sir, okay, actually we can still increase our sales, no, by 10%. So this will now become 510,000, and this one will be 510,000. So pwedeng tanungin, how much should be our net income? Okay, if this one is 510, that's 510, and that's 200. Okay, how much should be your net income? So that your ROI will increase to 20%. Ayan. So, nasa calculator natin. Bakit hindi ko mahanap? Hanapin natin yung calculator na yan. Saglit lang. Alt, Tab. Ayun. Okay. So, ano na yung ginagawa natin? We have 510,000 divided by 200, okay, you will get this will now be 2.55. 2.55. Okay, now you have 30 divided by 510. Okay, 30,000, 1, 2, 3 divided by, ay hindi, mag-work back pala tayo. Okay, so mali. So if this one is 20%, what are we going to multiply with 2.55 so that we will get 20%? Okay, so paano ba yun? 0.2. Okay, so you have 20, oops, ganun pala, 20 divided by 2.55, you will get 7.84%. Tama ba? Okay, so 7.84. So dapat ito ay 7.84. Okay, so you need a margin of 7.84. Okay, which means that if your sales is 510, all you have to do is to multiply 510. Okay, you multiply that by 784. Okay, your net income should be 39,984. Lagay natin, this one should be 39,984. Okay, so that's the required net income, which means, okay, you have to reduce your expenses by how much? By, kasi dati 30, di ba? Okay, paano ka magkakaroon dito ng 39,984? So your new sales is 510, and then your expenses equals net income. Net income is 39,984. Ayan. So your new expenses should be equal to, ayan, compare that with 510,000. And your expenses should be 470.16. Okay lang pala eh. Okay, so ayun. Pwede pa palang tumaas yung expense mo kahit by 16. Okay po, so ayun, ganun. You can use that, to work around, okay, and find the expected level of your sales, your net income or expenses, and the expected assets, okay, so that you'll meet your target. In this case, it is 20% ROI. Okay, now some of the things that you have to consider in using ROI is that, well, kung hindi malinaw yung mga basic strategies natin, baka mahirapan yung manager. So that's one. And in the process of using ROI, your manager may have some committed costs na hindi na niya control, And when we say committed costs, these are costs that arise from a long-term decision. An example of a committed cost is, let's say, depreciation expense. Once you purchased an asset, okay, you will be committed to the depreciation expense, okay, throughout its economic life. Okay, so ayun. Also, by using ROI, okay, managers may reject profitable investment opportunities, which we will discuss later after we compute or after we discuss the third tool. Palitan nga natin ito ng yellow. The third tool, which is your residual income. Residual income or income na tira-tira. Okay, this is your net operating income above the minimum return on operating asset. Okay, I prefer the approach standard income versus your actual net income, and that is now your residual income. So your actual net income, most of the time, this is given, and that is given. Now you compare that with your standard net income. Ito net income din yan. So, yan. Okay, your standard net income is computed by multiplying your minimum required rate of return times, okay, your operating assets. Operating, okay, operating assets. Discuss na natin yung operating assets kanina. Okay, so kumbaga, ito yung dapat na return ko coming from my assets. Pag na-compute ko yan, magkano ba yung actual na return ko? So, if my actual net income is higher than my standard net income, then that is now my residual income. Okay, and the higher the residual income, the better. Ganun naman tayo sa mga tools natin eh. For segment margin, the higher the segment margin, the better. For ROI, the higher the ROI, the better. Okay, so, ganun. Now, let's have an example. Assuming, okay, gaya nyo, we have an entity, okay, whose one of its segments has an operating asset. Let's say the operating asset, okay, is 100,000. Okay, and then the minimum required rate of return is 20%. And you have the actual net income is 30,000. How much is the residual income? Let's compute for the standard by multiplying these two. Standard net income should be 20,000 pesos. Okay, now we compare that with 30,000 and you will get 10,000. That's now your residual net income. Okay po, so ayun, ibig sabihin if your residual income is positive, you were able to earn above the minimum required rate of return, which is favorable. Paano kapag zero? Okay pa rin, okay? Because you're still earning, okay, at the minimum required rate of return. Okay po? Let's have another example. Let's assume that you have a segment, no? You have the segment with a net income. Let's say that the net income is equal to 60,000. Ito nasa material nyo to. Okay? And with that, the total asset, okay, the total asset for this segment is, ayan, 30,000. And the minimum required rate of return is 15%. Okay, so pag tinanong po tayo, what is our return on investment? Okay, the easiest way is to divide 60,000 by 300 by 300,000. Okay, so 60 divided by 30, our return on investment is 20%. Ayun. Okay, now what if, no? What if, let's say, you are going to make an investment. Ito. The manager would like to evaluate if she can make an additional investment. Ayan. Additional investment of 18,000. No, not 18,000. 100,000. And then this investment, okay, earns 18%. If you are the manager of this segment, are you going to make an additional investment of 100,000, okay, with a return of 18%? Okay, so if you're being evaluated using ROI, syempre you have to compute for the new ROI. So what is our new ROI? New ROI will now be 60,000 plus, okay, 18,000. This is 100,000 times 18%. divided by our new asset, which is 300,000 plus 100,000. Okay, so this one will become 78,000 and this one will become 400,000. So your new ROI will now be 19.5%. Ayan. Medyo memorize ko tong part na to kaya hindi na ako nag-compute. Okay. So, question, from 20% to 19.5, will you be happy? The answer is no. Bakit bababa yung ROI ko by making this investment? Okay? Now, what if you're being evaluated not on ROI, no, not based on ROI, but based on residual income? So, let's compute. What is our residual income? Ayan. How do we compute for the residual income? Again, you have here your actual less the standard net income. Okay, so your actual net income is 60,000 and the standard net income is 300,000. You multiply that by 15% and that is 45,000. So your residual income is now 15,000. Okay, so balik tayo. Am I willing to make an investment at 100,000 with a return of 18% if I am being evaluated used on residual income? Okay, so i-check natin. If that's the case, let's compute what will be the new residual income. Okay, so i-check na natin. Ang actual net income mo na will become, yung na-compute natin kanina, 60,000 plus 18,000. So this will now be 78,000. Okay, less the standard net income, which is 400,000. Times, magkano ba yung dapat na ina-earn natin? The minimum required rate of return is 15%. So, 400 times 15%, that will be 60,000. So, you will now have 18,000 as the new residual income. Okay, so, from 18,000 naging 18,000. Are you willing to make the investment? The answer is yes, because this will increase my residual income. Ito yung sinasabi natin kanina. This is one of the weakness of return on investment. A manager may reject a profitable investment if we are just using residual income. So are we saying, residual income, ROI. Are we saying residual income is better than ROI? Hindi naman, not necessarily, no? Take note, we cannot use the residual income approach if we are comparing the performance of different segments. Bakit? Because a bigger segment may appear to have a larger residual income. Okay, pero hindi naman siya ganun ka profitable. If you're going to compare different segments, it's still better to use your residual, return on investment, because in terms of percentage siya it eliminates the issue on size. Okay po? So, saan natin ginagamit yung residual income? Well, if we're just evaluating the decisions that are made by that segment. Okay? For decision making yan. Pero pag comparison between segments, dun po tayo sa ROI. Okay po? So, ayun. Let's have another example. Kunyari, we have two segments, no? Segment A and segment B. Let's assume that their assets, the total asset is, asan na ba yung kodigo ko? Nandito yun. Ayun. Their total asset is 100,000. And this one is, 1 million pesos. O diba, dito pa lang, no? Pag nag-segment margin ka or nag-residual income approach ka, parang mali na. Why? Because they have different sizes. Ito ang asset niya, 100 lang. Ito, 1 million. But anyway, let's continue. Let's assume that the minimum required rate of return is 20%. Ayan. So, if that's the case, this is now the standard or required net income. Okay. Now, let's compare that. Let's compare that with the actual net income. So, you have the actual net income here na 30,000. Ito ay 220. Let's compute what's the residual income. Okay. Your residual income for segment A is 10,000. Well, this one is 20,000. Are we saying that B is better than A? Hindi naman. They are not comparable. Okay. Ngayon, kung ganito yung gagamitin natin, or you want to compare segment A with segment B, it's better to use the ROI. So, let's compute for the ROI. You have a net income of 30. Dito, the net income is 220. We divided by their assets. This one is 100. While this one is 1 million. Madali na lang yung mathematics nito. This one is 30%, while this one is 22% lang. Mas profitable pa nga ito kahit na mas maliit siya. Okay po, if you remember our discussion with the common size financial statements. Okay, so that's it. Okay, for this portion, ano yung kailangan yung tandaan? 3 responsibility centers. What are your cost center? What is your profit center? And what is your investment center? How do you evaluate the performance of these centers? Okay, you can use the segment margin, the return on investment, and the residual income. For cost center, syempre, the lower the cost, the better. For profit center, most of the time, ang ginagamit natin ay ito, segment margin and residual income. Okay, for investment center, you can use segment margin, return on investment, and residual income. Okay, so pag naintindihan nyo yan, you now relate that to the basic concept of what is decentralization. Decentralization versus what is a segment or what is segmentation, and then what is responsibility accounting. Bakit meron tayong responsibility centers? Okay po, so that's it. Okay, wala na, tapos na.